Welcome everyone, and happy holidays. It's the bi-weekly NHL Hockey Debates podcast. I'm joined today by Kevin Allen. Sadly, normally, as you know, on Thursdays we talk about this week in NHL betting, but our resident NHL betting expert, Sasha Peruk from Sports Betting Dime, is sidelined with the flu. I don't know if we're allowed to say that. Should we just say upper body injury? I don't know. What would the flu qualify as, Kevin? That be upper or lower? I guess it's
I think that's up
both, really, depending on where the fluids are exiting your body.
yeah. No, I guess so. Yeah, I'm sure Sasha's going to appreciate that comment if he watches. But there's flu going around. Every place you turn, you hear stories of somebody didn't go somewhere because they were flu, and then the NHL, you got a lot of guys not playing because of that.
I know.
Obviously, that's the kind of change that you don't know about to the last minute that really affects betting.
Exactly, yeah.
You have Draisaitl and Connor McDavid, both came down with the flu before a big game. I mean, that changes everything for the Edmonton Oilers. So, I remember doing a story on when Sidney Crosby had the mumps, and I called the CDC in Atlanta to talk about it, and they made the point that the flu was more dangerous in their mind, for a team than the mumps, because the flu just runs rampant within a dressing room environment, and it's all the guys are going to get it. They're going to be clumps and groups of them, and it's just going to be difficult to deal with. And you see that every year. Every year there's a flu that kind of goes around the league, and players, miss a game or a period or something because of it. So, those are the kind of things that impact the season or a game that you never count on. It's even more bizarre than an injury because it usually takes someone out of the lineup for one game and not several games.
Well, in history, there's only been two things that prevented there being a Stanley Cup winner in a season. One was a lockout, and the other was the flu.
Yeah.
In 1919, Montreal had so many players down with the flu that they couldn't ice a lineup to play against Seattle. And initially, Seattle was offered the cup by forfeit, and they declined. And you wonder if that happened today. I mean, what are the odds of an NHL team not having enough players to play a game? But you think would a team turn it down in that scenario? Would sportsmanship come to the fore, or would that?
No. Because it's too valuable of a marketing tool. But, I was about to say, because I've covered lockouts and I've covered labor management issues, I was going to say, I'd rather cover the flu than the labor management strife. But, the flu killed back in those days. So I guess I'd rather cover and have it be lost to a labor management dispute than the flu.
I see that festive Christmas tree over your shoulder there behind you, Kevin. And this has nothing to do with hockey, but it just struck me. I had the holiday music on today, and Andy Williams' song, "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year." Great song, great Christmas song. But what do scary ghost stories have to do with Christmas? It's always baffled me. Was it, did you just need a line to finish the song and that came to mind? Again, I can't unfortunately ask him because he's no longer with us, but it just always, that's Halloween. That's not Christmas.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I don't, I don't understand that. Well, there's a lot of lines, in Christmas songs that you wonder exactly, quite, how they got there. I will tell you that it's part of the Allen family tradition that we have the what we call the bowling extravaganza, which is a bowling tournament of Allen family and friends. Usually, like this year, I think we're going to have between 25 and 30 people who bowl 2 games, and we're the worst bowlers known to mankind. I think we should actually be embarrassed because of our Michigan roots, because Michigan is pretty much a bowling state, but the Allens just don't have the bowling genes. But we have fun going out there, and then post the bowling extravaganza on that night, we have what we refer to as the reindeer games. And the reindeer games is usually a test administered by the patriarch of the family, which would be me, on Christmas trivia. And this year I've got just a hellacious test for my family on Christmas trivia. And there's prizes, of course, but it's 50 multiple choice, 15 true or false, and 10 matching. And we get into it. Let me just say that we're a competitive family, a lot of master's degrees in my family, and questions are very, very hard. Guessing is pretty much required because some of these things you couldn't possibly know that I've dug up. But it's usually quite fun. But it contains lyrics of songs, and like a sample question would be, who was the first president to put a Christmas tree in the White House? And I give you 4 options, and you got to pull that out. And who was the first one to send out Christmas cards, and so forth. So just kind of a sampling of not all Christmas traditions are sleighs and trimming the tree and everything. We have a couple of different odder things in our house.
Well, one of the best hockey-related Christmas traditions I ever heard of. I got to know John Ferguson pretty well when he was living in Windsor and working. One time worked running Windsor Raceway, and then later got back into the NHL. But he told me every Christmas, all the Ferguson clan would gather in Windsor at his home, and on Christmas Eve, he was in charge of renting the ice, and they had a Ferguson family hockey game. John Sr. would draft a team, and John Jr. would draft a team, and they would go at it. And you can imagine, as I asked him, I imagine those games are pretty intense because, knowing the Fergusons, there's a lot of competitiveness there as well. And he said, yeah, it was not only competitive, the bragging rights were important, but he said there was also a lot of hurt feelings because if you were one of the last family members picked in the draft, you were pretty sour about it. I thought that was a great tradition. And, what would you expect from 2 serious hockey guys like the Fergusons?
I love that story. I will tell you that the reindeer games and the Mega 50 multiple choice questions includes one that I'm pretty sure I got from you. I think you told me the story, and I don't want you to answer it because a member of one of my children or family members could be watching the podcast. But I have a question in there about which former member of the Los Angeles Kings paid to have ice dumped on his lawn so his children could have a white Christmas. And I give them 4 options, and I'm not going to give everyone here 4 options, but we'll tell you in the next podcast after the reindeer games who that was. But I know Bob knows off the top of his head, because I'm pretty sure you told me that story, didn't you, Bob?
I do believe I did, yes.
Yeah. So
if any of the members of the Allen family are listening, I am able to be bought. So
well,
we can negotiate terms.
The top prize may be enough that you might be able to negotiate something out of it, at least a cup of hot cocoa or something out of that. But anyway, let's talk some hockey, Bob. I wanted to talk a little bit about, I saw Austin Matthews quoted as saying that their offense is just better. The players are more comfortable, now that they have Sheldon Keefe as a coach and not Mike Babcock. And, that's such a indictment of Mike Babcock. I mean, I get the fact that it's difficult. Mike's difficult to deal with, and it's not fun playing for him. But he never struck me as, when he was with the Red Wings, as a guy who obstructed offensive creativity. Generally, as was explained to me by some Red Wings players, he generally left the top 2 lines alone, but the 3rd and 4th lines belonged to him. And, he let Datsuk and Zetterberg do what they did. And, it was the 3rd and 4th lines that he tended to control. What's your take on what Matthew said? And I know you can add another voice to that as well.
Yeah, I was at the U.S. World Junior Camp, was in Plymouth, Michigan, at the beginning of the week. And one of the players in camp who made the team was Nick Robertson from the Peterborough Petes, Toronto's second-round pick in 2018, a guy who's already scored 23 goals in 22 games this season for the Petes. And he was really excited to see that Keefe was now the Leafs coach. Keefe actually coached the Leafs rookies or Leafs prospects in the rookie tournament up in Traverse City in the fall, and Robertson was on that team, and he said he absolutely loved playing for him because he lets them be creative. He lets them take offensive chances. He doesn't really kind of stunt their ability to make plays and that, and just be the dump and chase kind of protect the puck and play it safe kind of coach. He likes them to use their skill and their brains to try to make things happen. And he was pretty excited to know that going forward in the Leafs system, he's going to have a chance to play for Keefe. And he didn't say anything bad about Mike Babcock. He was just very excited about Keefe. But we've both been around hockey a long time. Has hockey changed enough that a style of that ilk can win in the playoffs?
That is a great question. I mean, we were talking about Peter Laviolette and the fact that, he's on the hot seat, and he's one of the few guys in the NHL that I think you would say is an offensive coach. And by that, I mean, he really pushes the offensive side of the game. Almost all coaches, start with a, strong defensive base and say things like, well, offense comes from good defense. Where I think I've always felt that Peter Laviolette was a little more offensive centric. Now, I don't want to say he doesn't practice defense, because obviously his teams, do play defensive. But I'm just saying, I think he's more offensive minded than some coaches. So there's not many of those guys in the game. Almost every top coach you can think of, you would say they were a defensive coach, because that's the way it is. But the game has changed, as you and I both know, over the last few seasons, where it's all about youth and speed, and that has tended to be more of an offensive weapon than a defensive weapon.
We both watched a team that was very similar to this Toronto team in the early 90s. The Red Wings were, what an offensive power they were and what fun they were to watch, much like the Leafs. They're a very entertaining team to watch, but we also saw them make a lot of stunning first-round exits from the playoffs because they couldn't bear down and win a 2-1 game when they had to. And, has the game changed enough that a team can win 5-3 and 6-4 in the playoffs?
I don't think so. I think you got to be able to be in a position that if you got to have a team that can play any way that it needs to in order to win. Are you getting my feedback?
No.
Okay, all right, because I'm getting a little bit of feedback there. But I think you've got to have the kind of team that if you need to play a 6-5 game, you can, but you're just as comfortable playing a 2-1 game or a 1-0 game. I thought the Tampa Bay Lightning was that kind of team, but obviously they haven't been this season. I thought the Lightning could play any way you wanted to play, but we have not seen that.
No, I'm still you keep waiting for them to throw the switch, but it just doesn't seem to be happening for them. And you just wonder, like we talked about last week, is this just one of those years where they're going to be snake bit and bad things are going to keep happening to them?
Do you think they're going to be, though? You remember when the Sharks had that period of about 5 or 6 years when we kept thinking, all right, well, this team is good and they're going to make the run this year and they've got all the components and they're ready to go, and then it just wouldn't happen. I'm starting to wonder whether the Lightning are this era's version of the Sharks that have all the ingredients and look good on paper and play some terrific games that look great, but can't seem to get it done.
And another team similar to that was the Rangers of the early to mid 70s. I mean, you had the gag line was Gilbert Hadfield Rattel. You had Eddie Jockman, a Hall of Fame goaltender. You had Brad Park, who was always, probably would have won a Norris at some point in his career if he didn't play in the same era as Bobby Orr. And yet those, either it was Montreal or it was Boston, or then later in the run it was the Flyers. There was always a team that was just a little bit better than them, and they could never win the cup.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. I mean, there's always teams like that in the NHL where, I think there's some luck involved in that, though. I mean, I know people always want to say that, they didn't have the mental toughness, but, I always have to remind people, there's 31 teams in the league, soon to be 32. Like, you can be a great team and not win the cup. Sometimes it's just not going to happen for you because, the luck didn't go your way. And old time hockey people just hate hearing that. They don't necessarily buy that, but you make your own luck. You make you hear that all the time. Well, I'm not so sure I believe that. Like, there's certain things that happen that are simply just out of your control. And with the parity that we now have in this league, where the difference between the top teams and the average teams just isn't all that significant, where luck just plays a greater role now than it has in the past. Like, I think that's why I think hockey is an intriguing betting option, because you can get good odds on a decent team that just doesn't have the pedigree, or isn't a fan favorite, and that team may really have a decent chance of winning it all. I mean, if I was an avid bettor, I would right about January, try to find a team that just looks average, that has pretty good, and lay some few shekels on them to make a run, because they're just as likely to win as a team that is very, very good and had an incredible regular season record. Because they, back in the 40s and 50s, they were calling the playoffs the second season, but it really is. It's completely different than the regular season. And there's so many variables that you don't see in the regular season. I mean, we don't play a regular season where you play one team 7 consecutive games. That's completely different. And, we never talk about that, but it is. Familiarity does breed contempt. Familiarity, there's no secrets. You're not surprising anyone. You get to know this team. And I think it takes a different kind of team to win in the postseason. I don't think it isn't just about playing good defense. I think there's more to it than that.
And, as much as everyone likes to wax romantic about the original 6 era, in those days, you won one playoff series and you were in the final. And then once you're in the final, and all it takes is, as you say, a couple of bounces go your way, and suddenly you've won the Stanley Cup. Like, I always tell Leaf fans, and they don't like to hear it, but I said, the 67 Leafs were around today, there's no way they would have won that cup, because by the end of the second round, which was the final against Montreal, Bauer was out. They had 4 or 5 guys that were playing on fumes that were seriously hurt. And, they would have had to win 2 more rounds today. So there's no way that team would have survived 4 rounds.
Yeah. Speaking of original 6, I've wondered, is it time, Bob, to, I'm an original 6 snob, as I'm assuming you are as well. Like, I do romanticize those first 6 teams. When I was a kid, that's how many teams there were. And when I first learned the game, there were only 6 teams. But, the next 6, the first expansion, those teams have been around a half a century now. Like, can't we just say the first 12 at least? Like, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, to me, those 2 teams have romance. The Blues have finally won as well. I think they have a special distinction as well that, to me, is a little bit different than the Columbus Blue Jackets or the Florida Panthers or even the Tampa Bay Lightning, Carolina Hurricanes. Like, there's I can be nostalgic about the Penguins and the Flyers, and certainly the Blues as well. So I think those guys hold a special distinction to me, in addition to the original 6.
Well, they absolutely do for me, because I'm just a few years younger than you. So I was 5 years old growing up in Toronto when the Leafs won the Cup in '67. So the '67 expansion, to me, it was just a fantastic deal. When you're a little kid, something new is always exciting. And to see all these new teams, and they had such, for the most part, had unique uniforms. Some of them weren't too pretty, maybe, but they were certainly different than what we were used to seeing. And then because so many of the veteran guys, like a Glenn Hall, a Terry Sawchuk, who was my favorite player as a kid, goes to LA, so instantly I had a sort of affection for the Kings, although it didn't last long because they got rid of them after 1 year. But funnily enough, I became a fan of the Pittsburgh Penguins just by coincidence. My mother worked with the niece of Jack Riley, who was the Penguins' first GM, and in the fall of 1968, she set up a trip for us where we went down to Pittsburgh, saw them play the Rangers, got to meet all the players. And then in 1970, Jack Riley arranged for my brother and I to come into training camp and just have the run of the place. I mean, I was a 9-year-old kid, and in those days, the public wasn't allowed in training camp. So we were literally the only people in there that weren't team employees. And my mother got me an autograph book. I got every player to sign it. I still have it. I mean, 3/4 of the names in that book never made the NHL. But there's also Red Kelly. There's also Andy Bathgate. And I remember vividly sitting during a scrimmage, sitting in the penalty box, chatting with John Pronovo and Bob Wojtowicz, who had both just gotten penalties during the scrimmage for scuffling with each other. And Bob Wojtowicz says to me, he asked me what position I played, and I told him I was a goalie. He said, well, if you ever change your mind, he said, don't play defense. And I said, why? And he smiled, and he had no teeth. And he said, look at him. And Pronovo smiled at me, and he had all his teeth. So Wojtowicz was basically saying, if you like your teeth.
Very well taken, yeah. Yeah, they block shots a little differently back then, I guess, is the moral of that story. Yeah, I mean, I think about it now too. I've done some stories about the early years of the Penguins, and Riley and a lot of the players hated that nickname, the Penguins, when it first happened. They thought it was a ridiculous, nickname. And now it seems iconic to me. I just can't imagine why you wouldn't like that. It just seems like a cool, the Penguins. But now we've attached, success to it. We attach Mario Lemieux and Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin and Jaromir Jagr. Now that Penguins logo, it carries a little weight to it. And the fact that they've, won multiple cups and, not one like the St. Louis Blues, for example, or even two like the Philadelphia Flyers. So it's funny, too, how winning changes the look of your jersey or what your nickname is. I'm not sure that everybody, loved all the nicknames that have come through, but as soon as you win one time, then that sort of changes everything.
I remember looking in the microfilm one time at the Windsor Star, and I came across a story that Jack Dolmage, who was a long-time sports editor at Windsor Star, Hockey Hall of Famer like yourself, he was at the NHL meetings in 1966, the season before the expansion took place, but all the teams had already been approved, and all the execs and coaches from those teams who'd been hired were already there at the governor's meetings, and they had a golf tournament, and it happened that Dolmage was paired in the same foursome with Red Sullivan, who was the first coach of the Penguins, and they hadn't announced the team name yet. And he asked Sullivan if he knew what the team was going to be called. He just said, I'd rather not say. And he said, well, why not? He said, it's kind of embarrassing. Finally, kept prodding him, and he finally said, all right, it's the Penguins.
Yeah, I just can't even imagine. But they really embarrassed is the word that I remember. I talked to the original owner of the Penguins, and that was what he said. Everybody was embarrassed by the logo. And as I recall the story, geez, and I hope I have this right, but I believe it was his wife who came up with the idea of the original, Penguins. But anyway, I guess we're feeling festive here because we've sort of been a little bit off topic. But let's talk a little bit more. I wanted to get your take on the impact that the Taylor Hall trade will make in that Western Conference, specifically the Pacific Division. I mean, the Coyotes have played playoff-style winning hockey. By that, I mean, they're keeping the goals against down to a bare minimum. They've got strong shot-denying defensive ability. Their goalkeeping has been exceptionally strong. They've got great coaching. They just have trouble scoring. Now, Taylor Hall is going to come in. He's a 5-time 30-goal scorer. How much of an impact is he going to make, and does that tilt the balance of power in your mind, Bob?
Well, I was fortunate enough to see Taylor Hall play hockey in person from the time he was 16 because he was in Windsor with the Spitfires, and they won 2 Memorial Cups with him as their best player. And I specifically remember the second Memorial Cup they won in the Eastern final in the OHL, they fell behind 3-0 to Kitchener, a Kitchener team that was led by Gabriel Landeskog and Jeff Skinner, so they had some pretty good players too. And it was as if Hall said, no, we're not losing this series. He just took that series over. They went up to Kitchener for game 4, down 3-0, and Hall just totally dominated the game. And now that's obviously junior hockey compared to the NHL. And in the NHL, he really hasn't had a chance to do that in a playoff series. I mean, the Devils made it the one year, but they were, barely in the playoffs and certainly a long shot to win. And they only lasted 5 games against Tampa Bay. But now he's in a situation, as you say, he's got a team around him with great structure that plays solid defense, has the goaltending. This might be the perfect storm for him to land on this team and kind of be the guy who carries them and delivers the big goals and makes the big plays that get them going.
Yeah, and this is a real good opportunity for him because, as previously mentioned, this is a quality team. Like, he's not going to a team that we're not sure about. We're sure the Coyotes can play, strong defensively. They just need to score some goals, and that's going to fall on him. From the Coyotes' perspective, they need the MVP, Taylor Hall, not the guy they've seen this season. He just seemed a little bit lost. Now, I think the argument is, and from the pro Taylor Hall folks, is, hey, look, he was a little discouraged. This team wasn't nearly as good as he had hoped it was going to be. And, now that he's with a good team, it's going to be much better for him. But, we need to see that. And if that's the case, if he's the MVP, Taylor Hall, I think that takes them past Edmonton because, obviously Edmonton's offense with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl is dynamic and incredible. But Arizona has such an advantage in my mind defensively and in net. Their goaltenders are playing so well, Antti Raanta and Darcy Kemper in particular, who has played, terrific. So I think if Taylor Hall can just narrow that gap in offense just a little bit, that could be enough to give the Coyotes, advantage to move past and be a better, more dangerous team than the Edmonton Oilers.
It's funny when you hear people say he's having an off year, and they're not incorrect in that assumption, but he's still at the day of the trade with 25 points in 30 games, which led the Coyotes in scoring.
Yeah, he's involved certainly with everything they do. It's just the goal scoring it's down. Like, assists are great, but on that Coyotes team, they're not going to have other people that he can dish off to score goals. He's going to have to score them. They're going to have to give him the puck, and he's going to have to put it in the net. So, it's going to be interesting. I'm bullish on this Coyotes team. I had picked them to make the playoffs, but I didn't know they were going to be this good. I'm a little surprised at how they have come along this quickly. I shouldn't say that because they've been out of the playoffs for several years, but I think John Chaika has done a remarkable job of bringing that team along. And when he took it over, there was really no winning culture, no battle plan. Like they knew they wanted to be better, and that's about all they had, is that they wanted to be better. But they didn't seem to have a direction, and not everybody was pulling in the same direction. And now they have a team that has a real plan on what they're trying to do, and a very, 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 very aggressive general manager. You look at the number of trades he's made since he showed up as the youngest GM in pro sports, and it's really remarkable. He's in the David Poyle, Jim Rutherford camp in terms of his ability to make trades. There's no doubt about it.
And that bodes well for them going forward because if there's a piece they think they need to further their chances, like you say, there's a guy who's A, capable of making the trades, and B, not afraid to pull the trigger if he thinks it's going to get them over the hump.
Yeah, for sure. And I think he's going to be a top GM for a long, long, long time because he's such a young man.
Well, we're out of time, as a matter of fact. We've had another stimulating conversation today. I hope everyone has enjoyed it. And I'm Bob Duff. This is Kevin Allen. We're the Hockey Debates podcast. So are we going to do this next week, or are we going to take a Christmas break, Kevin?
I think we're going to have to take a Christmas break. I'm going to have a house full of people, so I won't be able to do it.
All righty. So we'll see you in 2 weeks' time, folks, and everybody have a happy holiday.
Merry Christmas.